Friends, welcome to the ACP. Today's guest is Jack Kufari, an interspiritualist minister whose roots are in the Abrahamic tradition. He mainly studies Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, but he has a really wide knowledge of philosophy and religious practice. His program of spiritual teaching is called the Five Doors, and it represents a pathway that we go down, and that these different doors are sort of different dimensions of understanding and practice in which we can apply to ourselves, sort of almost use as a reference point to understanding our own spirit's pathway. So please open your hearts and minds to this wonderful speaker. There is no formal meditation for today's guest, so if you'd like to just take a few minutes before the episode starts to center yourself and breathe and open your mind to the wisdom that was about to pour into you, please do so. Just one thing really quick, there actually is a bit of misinformation in this episode. When Jack and I are talking about a disciple of the Buddha who was a serial killer, we misname him by accident. We call him Ananda, who is actually the right-hand disciple of the Buddha and is very different from being a serial murderer. The serial murderer who became a disciple of the Buddha is named Angulimala. So I just wanted to clear that up. There's some misinformation in there, and I think some people might be a little bit disappointed to hear me say that the right hand to the Shakyamuni Buddha is a serial murderer. So just clearing that up, sit back and enjoy this conversation.
Authentic Praise Podcast.
So we are sitting here in the courtyard at First Congregational Church in Montclair with Jack Kufari. And Jack is an interspiritual minister who draws from many different traditions and has set up this outline for spiritual understanding called the Five Doors. And to my understanding, the Five Doors aren't this progressive thing that you go by, but sort of like a, for lack of a better term, a process of divination where you're sort of understanding perspective. But, please correct me if I'm wrong. And that, this is a culmination of many different traditions and theologies. So if you could just tell us a little bit more about it, that'd be great.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me here. Yeah, it's not linear per se, but the fifth door can really only be achieved in a healthy way if you've done the other work.
Right.
So it is progressive in some ways, but at the same time, like anything else, we can be at a certain stage and have to go back and refresh an earlier stage.
Sure.
It's a never-ending process.
Mm-hmm.
It's like one of my teachers said, and I don't remember if it was a Hindu or Buddhist teacher, I'm afraid, but they were saying, once you've attained enlightenment, it's not like you can just binge watch Netflix and eat dark chocolate and let it go. You have to still do the work in every moment.
It's not a finish line that you cross.
Never finished.
Yeah.
And, our human nature always pulls us back to needing to do more work.
Right. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So if you could just tell us, what is dipping your toes into the Five Doors like?
Okay. Well, the Five Doors is really just a way to understand. It's a pathway, which means it's not the pathway. It's a pathway to establishing a personal spiritual practice. And everyone's practice is completely unique, just as everyone's relationship to the divine is unique.
Absolutely.
Right? So the first door is understanding that you are loved unconditionally by the ground of all being, that you belong here, that you get to accept your acceptedness. And it's something that a lot of people have problems with. I've worked with folks who have been clergy for decades who have problems with this.
Right.
And it's because our Western culture is one of dissatisfaction and kind of a promotion of incomplete feeling. So we tend to feel like, I'm not the first on my block or whatever.
Right.
So there's this need to get back to the basics, that you are a child of God. And when I use the word God, and I should clarify this, I understand that means something different to every person. For me, it means that which transcends my ego. In my understanding, it's all about ego.
Right.
Yeah. So that's the first door, is understanding you belong here. You're worthy of this work. You deserve to become as whole as you were meant to be. The second door is the importance of building sacred time into your life, not trying to squeeze it in, In that door, I lean a lot on the teachings of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, and he's teaching about Shabbat, the fact that the Sabbath is not is the work week isn't for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath is for the rest of life. The
Right.
Sabbath is a celebration of all of life, and
It's a reminder to bring that divine into our everyday life.
to step away from the rat race, the kind of the capitalist orientation of status and money and control and
Right.
material wealth and all that. That's not who we are. I mean, I've done maybe, I don't know, 160 some odd end of life services and funerals and memorials. And no one ever says, oh, she was the senior vice president of blah, 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 or made this much money. That's never what's talked about.
Right.
So, but anyway, the idea of Sabbath is not to try to squeeze it into your schedule or fit it into your schedule, but to build it into your schedule and to really observe that. And then the third door has to do with sacred space, and sacred time and sacred space kind of share an irony in that every moment is sacred and every inch of reality is completely sacred.
Right.
So when we set aside sacred space or sacred time, it's to remind us that everything is sacred.
Right.
And every inch is sacred. So if you're driving down the turnpike and you see these big garbage piles or you see oil tanks, that space is all completely sacred. What we do with it is a whole other story.
Right.
But every inch is so, and it has to do with what we call something. Like we could be doing this in Brookdale Park and we could say, right now the four of us here, this is sacred space and sacred
Right.
time because we say so.
Absolutely.
We're calling it as such, right? So sacred time, sacred space. The fourth door is what works for you in the way of practice. I mean, there's so many different things people can do. There's physical practice, like walking meditation, davening, or think of dervishes whirling.
Right.
You watch
Sufi practice.
Sufis,
Yeah.
When they're praying, they're saying Allah, Allah,
Right.
Allah, and they're moving their head and they're working their beads, because working beads or knots through our fingers. There's a fairly new science called neurotheology.
Okay.
And they've proven that working something through your fingers while you move a part of your body and repeat something opens parts of the brain that don't open otherwise.
It doesn't actually only. I've done a lot of research on this in terms of the importance of repetition, especially for martial arts. It's not only affecting these neural pathways in your brain. It's actually affecting your DNA on a certain level. I know that they say that in the martial arts, when you've done a movement 5,000 times, that it's now ingrained not just into your mind but into your body.
Right. That makes perfect sense. And actually, some of the things that are considered spiritual, physical disciplines are Tai Chi
Right.
and Qigong and some of these other disciplines. And it's important, for some people, contemplation and silence are very
Oh,
important.
most definitely.
For some people, singing and sacred dance, and you have to find what works for you.
Right.
And there's no right or wrong. The best advice I ever heard, and I share this, is that if you have a warm personality, if you are physical, a hot, warm personality, not warmth as far as loving, but if there's cool and warm personalities. If you have a cool personality, you're kind of reticent, a little bit quiet.
Right.
You're more intellectual, and doing a warm practice, a physical practice, is better for you. Whereas if you're very active and passionate and, like me, process very quickly, sitting down and shutting up is really good.
Yeah,
just
the
being
cool,
quiet.
cool
Yeah.
water-like practices. Yeah, absolutely. We all need these. We not all have not only equilibrium of our mind and body, but also our nervous system. And it's really like you're saying, there's so many different ways to tune and adjust your nervous system, and everybody responds to something differently. There's so much to unpack here. Before we get to the fifth door, I'd like to just go back to number one, because it seems like all of these doors are somehow interrelated, and that to me, what you're saying is when you work on one of these concepts, it seems like you're working a little bit on those other doors. For instance, the first door, and really understanding that love of God, and that you're
Love of self.
Love of self,
Yeah.
right? Sorry, love of self. It seems like we've, especially in these traditional systems of theology, that we've drawn this line between what we deserve as self-love, or if we deserve to feel God's presence. And that, it's so easy to get locked into this, well, I'm not doing something right, or I'm morally wrong, and then we chastise ourselves and
Amen.
and keep drawing this line, and it seems adjacent to some of the other things that you were saying in the other doors, that the more you're drawing a line of divisiveness, the further away you're getting from spirituality, from true spirituality.
It's duality and unitive thinking. It's duality versus unitive thinking.
Right.
I think that in the Judeo-Christian tradition, which is my tradition, there has been a lot of judgment built in.
Absolutely.
So when we do something we wish we had not done, whether it's, I had too many drinks last night, or I cheated on my wife, or I cheated on my tax return, instead of saying, our first response is, I am unworthy, I'm a piece of garbage, I suck. And the Buddhist line of thinking would be, well, I did something I wish I hadn't done, so what's the next right thing to do? And the Quaker teacher, Parker Palmer, says when something happens like that, we have to inject wonder into it.
Right.
I know that's not good for me. I didn't want to do it, and I did it anyway. I wonder what that's about. I wonder why I did that. I wonder what triggered me. And all of a sudden, instead of becoming punitive, it becomes educative.
Right.
Like all of a sudden, I'm learning something about how I am in the world. And in Christian theology, there's this concept of original sin, which, people are born into original sin, right? That there's something wrong with you and you have to get fixed. That's really that's not a biblical construct. It's really from after, it's like the first few hundred years later, maybe five, I forget exactly what year. It was Augustine. It was Augustinian thought about, you need God because you're flawed and broken.
Right.
Now, it's true that we're all flawed and broken.
Right.
And it's true that we all need God, right? We need to transcend ego. But I like to function from my micro-theology, and I use that word a lot. It means that, well, I'll get into what it means in a minute, but my micro-theology is that we come from original goodness, right?
That's a much more refreshing perspective, and there's two things I want to say about this. The first is that I'm interested in the comparison you drew to Buddhism, because, and especially in terms of forgiveness and seeing ourselves as redeemable and worthy of having a divine path.
Right.
I forget exactly which disciple. It might be Ananda, but I could be getting that wrong too. But there was a disciple of the Buddha who was a known murderer. He was a bandit and a serial murderer.
Ananda.
It is Ananda, right? That's what I thought. And before he becomes ordained and becomes part of the Sangha, he actually is, the story goes that he attacks Buddha on the road, and that Buddha comes from the Shakya clan. He is of the warrior caste, so with just his look alone, he's able to disarm Ananda, as the story goes. But that Ananda, from experiencing this love from him, he becomes so overwhelmed with emotion, and he doesn't think he's worthy of meeting the Buddha. He doesn't think he's worthy of spiritual practice, and the Buddha tells him that's wrong. Like maybe you're the karma you're gonna have to work out is gonna be intense. Like your sitting practice is gonna be pretty rough. You're gonna be visited by a lot of the people you might have killed, but you can do the work, and then you can experience salvation. And just before you go on to your next point, the thing I thought was interesting about what you're saying about the Augustinian concept of being born with original sin, it almost seems like stuff like that could be misconstrued over the ages, because it seems somewhat adjacent to the concept of karma. We are born with, sin might be the wrong word, but we're born with a certain karma, and that's also a launching off place for this spiritual journey in this incarnation.
Well, I'm working as a Christian minister, and I still use the teachings of Yeshua ben Yosef of Nazareth as my main filter. That's my source. But there's certain words I don't use when I teach and preach. I don't use the word sin. I don't use the word Lord. And I think you Americans have a very limited view of karma. They think karma is, if I kick your dog, then someday someone's going to kick my dog.
Right.
Instead of, the lessons I need to learn, I will get taught when it's time, whether I'm ready or not. And that's how I view karma. But, this is, you have to understand, I think, a couple of things. The first thing is human history is based upon some people being in charge and controlling and manipulating other people. And I think that the early church, by the time the Holy Roman Empire was formed in 800 AD, the church was a huge landowning entity. It owned, it ran countries. It had a standing army, and
Right.
it's in the real estate business. And all of a sudden, it's kind of the opposite of what it was. And telling people you need the church. So, and you have to give the church this much money because we're doing this, taxation and tithing and all that. If you convince people that you need that they need the church and that they have to listen to the church, and I mean, I was raised as a Catholic, and we weren't encouraged to read the Bible at all until the 60s, the 1960s.
Wow.
You leave it to the priests and the nuns, and they'll teach you. And
Oh my gosh.
well, that comes from centuries and centuries of assuming that the peasants aren't smart enough to have
Right.
the moral character to follow the Ten Commandments and to
Right.
do the right thing. So it really is a matter of human beings. We're all human, so we're all flawed. I like to think that we're perfect in our imperfection.
Yes.
Right? We are biological creatures.
Uh,
Hello, brother. we are biological creatures, and we have a reptilian brain that's based
Right.
on survival orientation.
right.
Take care of me, screw you. Like if I'm taking care of, maybe I'll help you.
Yeah.
And this is what I mean by ego. That I think if you read Scripture and Christian Scripture, Hebrew Scriptures, and if you replace the word Satan and devil and evil and sin with the word ego,
Oh,
you get
yeah.
all this understanding about,
Yeah.
it's not about me.
And-
When I transcend when my neighbor, if his father dies and I make him I make him food and I take him to the doctor and I help plan a funeral, that's me godding.
Right.
That's how God shows up. God
Yeah.
doesn't show up and make the casserole. I made the casserole,
Right.
but I'm transcending my ego. Like instead of saying, "Oh, poor guy, I'll show up," I'm saying, "I'm going to give some of myself." And it's hard to be in the world where we have to be egoic and not become egocentric.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there.
Sorry.
No. It's all beautiful. So I just hope there's a couple points I want to make. I just hope I can remember them all. But I completely see the need to remove the certain vocabulary, especially like stuff like sin and Lord. What is a Lord? Someone who you depend on. Someone who if their existence isn't there, your existence ceases to be. So that already draws this parasitic relationship.
Feudal.
It's feudal.
Yeah.
It's feudal. It's based in the caste system. It really is a way of creating this hierarchy that doesn't need to be there. And again, just in the line of what we were talking about, just drawing up all these divisions and borders around each other that say, I am the person who has knowledge, you are the person without knowledge, so you must follow what I say.
I do want to get a little bit back to duality and unity of thinking.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because what you talk about divisiveness is that the human mind likes to go, this is not that.
Right.
This is not that, right?
Uh-huh.
And in reality, at a molecular level, I'm this and this is that and this is me, and right.
There's almost no
So-
difference, yeah.
And what happens with duality is it creates tension and anxiety, and it creates an illusion of separateness. Thich Nhat Hanh says, "I'm this way, you're that way." What nonsense!
Right.
It's like it's not real, because the reality is that everything is one, and that sounds so trite, but the prayer in Islam, La ilaha illallah, means there is only God.
Right.
Like everything I see is God. It's God manifesting, right? You and
Absolutely.
this chair and that rock and these dudes in the grass. I mean, these are all manifestations of divinity. And I remember teaching little kids Sunday school, and I was saying how everything comes from God. And they're like, "What about plastic?" So
Yeah.
I'm like, "Well, where does plastic come from?" "I don't know. It comes from petroleum." "Where does petroleum come from?" "I don't know."
Absolutely.
It comes from organic matter, right?
Yeah.
It's like everything comes from this original physical creation.
It's that I think in almost no matter, we all have ego, right? As you were saying. So no matter what level of spiritual development we have, there's some level of ego we have to work out. And so when we get further along the path and we start like, oh, we need to go back to nature and do all this stuff, we start to draw the divisiveness in nature, and that's silly because everything emanates from that, right?
Yeah.
So just to, I'm glad we're talking about the concept of ego and divisiveness, because it brings me back to what you were saying about in terms of replacing the devil with ego, as in terms of not in terminology. That really reminds me of Mara. It seems like a more accurate way to describe that driving evil force in Buddhism, which Mara manifests as the ego, to distract you from the path,
Or vice versa, or the ego manifests as Mara.
right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
A good example is Jesus on the mountaintop,
Right.
by himself, and after 40 days and nights, he's hungry and starts, and the devil comes and tempts him. And unless you think there's a dude with a red suit and horns and a pitchfork,
Yeah.
this is his ego saying to him, these people are waiting for a Messiah to throw the Romans the hell out, right? You could do it. You could control all this. You could be their king. You could
Right.
lead them into, and he's like, I don't play that.
Yeah.
It's his ego saying to him, you could do this, dude. You don't have to suffer. He's like, no, this is not what I'm called to do.
Right. It's so similar to the story of Buddha and Mara. It's this really this temptation of power. Like, look at who you are. You could be the king of the world if you want to be.
Right.
And really, it's the ultimate test of ego, because if you are someone who's attained Buddhahood or Christhood, then really, in terms of our perception, we think, oh, they've eliminated ego, right? So of course, we're all human, right? But I only mean in terms of if they didn't defeat Mara or the devil like they did, they would have that divisiveness of, oh, I'm superior to these people, so I should be their king. Whereas they say, like, no, I'm a shepherd. I'm here to lead other people to this state. Right.
And I think that the way you lead people, the way you evangelize, is by living your life. And people
Right.
say, that life looks interesting. So how do you think we can we see like, obviously we're not going to be kings, any of us, right? But what is it, how does that translate into modern 21st century American life for the average person? How does this idea of you could be king of the world?
Right. I think it manifests in so many ways today. I think it's so, I don't want to say it's harder, but in some ways the ego is a little bit more on our face these days. And I think there's so many more temptations to not only be someone, have yourself seen, have your voice heard, but to also, have a certain level of status. We're all driving and looking for this status in any facet of what we want. We're and this is ingrained in American culture. We're taught you should, if you're doing something, you should try to be the best at it.
Right. If
Like,
you're not doing something, why are you not doing something?
yeah, why aren't you doing anything,
I'm doing
man?
nothing. Well, how do you know when you're finished? Well, that's not
Right.
the point,
You're not
right?
first, you're last.
Right, you're not first, you're last. And,
Right.
and what did
Yeah,
Jesus
Ricky
say?
Bobby.
Right, the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. All that. When I was in the business world, I was starting to get fed up with all that nonsense, right? And so I developed a LinkedIn profile called I was a branding consultant, so I had a LinkedIn profile called Most Excellent Branding Monkey, and I found a picture of a monkey with glasses on his nose, a little photograph of a chimpanzee reading Freud, and basically, because the reality is, the world is like, get on Wall Street, and this is what we see in the evangelical community. Our evangelical brothers and sisters, they behave as if Jesus was born in Glen Ridge and went to Choate and then
Right.
went to West Point, and now he's a commodities broker.
Oh,
And
my
I was like,
God.
why? Come on, this is a Palestinian immigrant,
Right.
refugee, and a artisan, a laborer. But there's that duality again of. And at the same time, we're guilty of it. I saw a meme. It was this picture of a really mad girl, and it says, "Hates fundies, acts just like them." Like we kind of we criticize fundamentalists, but they're just people trying to make their way and figure it out.
Right. Yeah.
So
And I think to your point, it's that further step in ego, because although seemingly the evangelical path is very destructive, it harbors so many qualities of homophobia, anti-Semitism, racism, so a lot of bad stuff. But certainly, I'm sure it's very rare, but certainly there could be that person that evangelist who maybe reads the Bible and is very, devout and takes certain things literally.
Absolutely.
But also lets it form a more healthy perspective in the world. I'm not trying to defend evangelists here, but it's a way of ourselves, just trying to break that down further by saying it's actually not, because God does exist everywhere, right? So it has to be possible for an emanation of God to even appear out of a scary tradition like that.
I mean, Donald Trump is a child of God.
Yeah.
How do I pray for Donald Trump? An older Quaker woman taught me, when somebody you can't stand, you pray for them. Imagine them as a baby in their mother's arms.
Right.
Even if you realize something probably went terribly wrong there, you pray for them. Because no one's beyond redemption.
Right.
Right. So that's again duality.
Yeah.
There's him and there's me. Well, this is Shakespeare. If you cut me, do I not bleed? It's like, we're called to have great compassion for each other, and
Right.
sometimes it's not hard and not easy. And I think that even in this highly polarized, dualistic political environment, being compassionate is very subversive and very revolutionary, because
Right.
being compassionate means being other-oriented.
It puts others before yourself.
And as Jimmy Carter pointed out, when we say others, we say we have the gospel, and it's so wonderful. I want to share it with these people who don't. Okay, you've just created another.
Right.
And that's the germ of potential persecution and oppression, right?
Right.
So even when we're saying, I want to help others, it's really just whoever comes into our life every day.
Right.
If I can be as compassionate as I can and as kind as I can to everyone, then that's a good day. Then I've managed to be who I'm supposed to be. I've pulled my weight on the planet.
I'm glad you brought up the Quakers, because it seems to me like the emphasis that Quakers place on compassion and forgiveness also seems very adjacent to the way many Buddhist teachers try to help people, especially us, Americans, deal with forgiveness and be more open to unconditional forgiveness. I think it was one of the books I've read by Thich Nhat Hanh, where he says, try to imagine every single person who you encounter as at one point, we've lived these countless lifetimes, right? So that means at some point, any person could have been your mother in one of those lifetimes. So that even your greatest enemy in this lifetime, perhaps in even just the previous lifetime, was your actual mother. And that if we can, sort of just break down that barrier and see each other as emanations of each other, not just emanations of each other, but our source of life.
We're all manifestations of divinity. We're
Right.
all part of the ground of all being, right? We're integral to the infinite and the eternal. We all are.
Yeah.
Right. And if we have that kind of respect, it's, it just takes, it's an intentional effort.
Absolutely.
It's intentional effort.
This has all been great, and a great culmination of these 4 doors. Can we move on to the 5th?
We kind of have. The fifth door is practicing sacred activism.
Okay.
Sacred activism is a phrase termed by Andrew Harvey, who's a great teacher. I recommend anyone read Andrew Harvey. These guys are laughing. I don't know why.
No,
Okay. Andrew Harvey's a wonderful teacher, and he lists these 10 steps to become a sacred activist. And really what it means is, and this is the essence of all I teach and preach, is that you belong, you're loved unconditionally by the ground of all being. And now what are you going to do about it?
Right.
Right? I can't just go to church and feel good. It's not therapy and then I go home, We're called as people who are being mindful to transcending our ego.
Absolutely.
To go do something. So, and it can be, there's no judgment about what it is, but you have to do something. And so the idea of sacred activism, now that you understand that all is one and that you're loved and you belong, and you've created the hallmarks of sacred time and space so that you can be more whole spiritually, and you've developed a practice
Right.
to be more whole spiritually, that's great.
Yeah,
Now-
what's the point of
so
all that, though?
What's the point of it? Just so you can be happy, and
Right.
it's not therapy.
Right.
It's not therapy.
And it'd be very selfish for you to just stop there.
And a lot of people do treat religion as therapy. They go to
They
church
do.
so they can feel better. They want to constantly be told in every sermon that you're wonderful and God loves you. That's true, but
Right.
that's just the beginning.
And it's
You know?
it's this very
Mosquitoes,
Western capitalistic mindset where we do stuff for ourselves. We're doing this for personal gain,
Right.
and so this really seems like what you were saying earlier about how when we reach enlightenment, do we just stop? Oh, yay, I did it. Okay, time to live in a cave forever.
Yeah, I'm enlightened. It's like, yeah.
One of my favorite sayings from the Tibetan Buddhist teacher Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche,
Rinpoche,
says, if you've reached this point of spiritual enlightenment, but you're also not disillusioned with the surrounding world around you and don't feel this call to act and transform, you're not spiritually enlightened.
No, you missed the point.
Exactly.
You missed
And
the
that
point.
you do have a lot of work to do on yourself before you can help others, but that in essence is the point. You become disillusioned with the way things are, and you realize I have to do something about it. I can't just sit here while everyone suffers, because that the suffering of others begins to affect you too.
Oh, exactly. When others suffer, we suffer. And,
Absolutely.
And this is really every faith tradition. Right? They all share. That you had mentioned. I told you I was an inner spiritual minister. That there's a difference between inner spirituality and interfaith.
Right.
Right. Interfaith is like, I'm Jewish, you're Baptist. We respect each other. We respect each other's traditions, and sometimes we'll worship together,
I see
and we'll
now.
even go on vacation together. But basically, I think I'm right.
Right.
Whereas interspirituality says all these faith traditions from around the world share the same perennial wisdom,
Right.
and each of them is a unique and valid and authentic path to the top of the mountain.
Right.
Right? But so they're all valid. So the seminary I went to, our teachers were Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, pagan, Yoruba, which is an African religion.
Right.
Did I mention it? There's all the major paths, right? Now, I'm a child of the teachings of the Abrahamic path. So Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Those are I've learned so much from Buddhism and from Hinduism and from the 12-step traditions and from my pagan brothers and sisters. There's just so much there, but it's all just like basically different languages.
Right.
Like I'm enculturated as a Christian, someone who was raised Catholic and then was a Presbyterian and then a Quaker and now at UCC. That's my filter. That's just the language that the divine speaks to me through. Right. And one of my micro practices, I have to define microtheology and micro-practice in a minute, but is when I see someone with a hijab or a yarmulke, or what are the Sikh brothers? Their turbans called, I forget.
Oh, yeah.
But when I see that, I say a little prayer quietly, a prayer of gratitude. Here's a devout one. Thank you for this devout one.
Right.
Thank you for this one who's trying to transcend ego, who's trying to be a better human being.
Dedicated the whole path to God.
So a micro, just so you know, I know you didn't ask, but I'll tell you anyway. Microtheology is, let's say the four of us all grew up in the same little town in Alabama, and we all went to the same church, and we studied with the same Sunday school teachers and heard the same pastor preach, and our parents did the same thing at that church with that pastor's predecessor, and on, and we all say, yes, this is a doctrine we believe in. At 3 a.m, when Mara shows up screaming at us, or whatever our issues are, our relationship to God is so personal and so unique. Like, we have our own understanding of what it all means. That's so my microtheology is all based on my ego. When my ego's barking, then oh yeah, you're so special. You're like losing your path right here. And micro practice are little tiny things you can do every day. Like whenever I see a bird or a squirrel or a chipmunk or a dog, and obviously another person, I always say hello. And if no one's around, I'll say hello to the trees. Good morning, sister. How you doing? How's everything? It's just to remind me that I'm connected.
Right.
It's not so much to share the kindness. That helps. That's nice. but it reminds me that I'm part of all this.
Not to sound too cliche or cheesy or anything, because especially stuff like this has gotten transformed and lost some of its meaning here. But it's sort of like saying Namaste, right? You're recognizing, the light in me recognizes the light in you. It's that I'm conscious being, you're a conscious being. I recognize that.
But most people will say that word probably don't even know what it means.
Right, exactly right,
Yeah.
exactly right.
I didn't know that's what it meant. Until
Yeah.
just
Well,
now,
this is.
so
I have a
for
thing. I've
context.
kind of
yoga
gotten to a
people will
point. I've gotten to a
Yeah,
point where
beaver.
like la ilaha illallah used to be a chant, I would say. Then I'm like, why did I say it in English? Like, why do I have to make myself jump over the? So with whether I'm saying a Muslim prayer, or a Christian prayer, or my own meditation, or a Buddhist mantra, or Tonglen practice, I do it in English. I just do it in English. So just one less barrier between me and understanding it. If I say gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisattva, I can also say deeper, let go, just keep letting go, let go even more, and may it be so, may it be so. And just like, I don't have to say it in different language.
Do you study languages in that capacity sometimes? Like to explore the native tongue, the spiritual path behind the native tongue?
I preach and teach from a very Jewish perspective.
Okay.
So I really dig into the meaning of words in Hebrew and Aramaic.
Sure.
I don't speak either language. Actually, this year, January 1st, and I'm not a resolution person, but after the first of the year, I'm going to study Hebrew. I really have always wanted to. Because in those languages, Aramaic and Hebrew especially, but also Arabic, every word and every phrase has multiple meanings.
Right. Yeah.
So when I teach a slow motion adult Bible study, everybody bring a different translation. So I say, this word says dome. What does yours say? Oh, mine says firmament. Mine says archway. Well, let's look and see which one of those means.
Right.
What does the original word mean? And so when people say, well, that's what the Bible says, and I'm done, that's it. I'm like, well, which translation? There's 450 English translations of those words.
Yeah.
And they come from, Aramaic. They come from Aramaic and Hebrew, and Greek. And Greek doesn't have that same kind of fluidity. But yeah, I'm a word geek, a word and history geek. Absolutely.
I think
Damn, I got bit.
both religion and language share this very cool commonality that's I'm going to tie to a point you were making earlier, which is that over time they transform.
They evolve.
They adopt qualities from each other.
Mhm.
They morph into each other, and so many different schools of thought and even sciences are produced from this. And so I think one of the most important things that I'm taking from this conversation and from your practice is the merit, the true merit of interspirituality, which is the further melting down of divisions. Especially if we have a very deep spiritual or religious experience, that can almost be another trap, or for lack of a better term, where we think, oh, this is the path. I found the path.
I'm done. Right.
Yeah, or
The
not
path.
only here I am, I'm done, but I need to get people on this path and off those other paths.
Yeah,
right.
That's bad.
And so when you have so many different teachers from so many different traditions who not only acknowledge each other as teachers, but take from not just acknowledging each other like it seems like the interfaith people do, not getting to draw divisions.
No.
But that when you do interspirituality, it's you're not just acknowledging other people, you're actually taking other practices and then integrating that into
Well,
your
and you
own.
see that what happens is you see the truth. Like I'll read something in the Bhagavad Gita, and I'm like, oh, yeah, Jesus said that over here in
Right.
the letter to the Philippians, or Paul's letter to the Philippians. I mean, these things pop up, and you see that. Yes, each one has its unique gifts. And as a spiritual director, if I'm working with someone who is was a former Catholic or was raised Jewish or whatever, I always say, go back and visit. I say, let the roots feed the crown. What was your family of origins faith? What were you raised in? There are gifts there.
Right.
There's stuff to be let go,
Yeah.
and there's stuff that has value. Let's mine it and see what has value, and let go of what is either an encumbrance or an obstacle. And because they're just paths developed by human beings.
That's something I'd like to talk about a little bit, actually, is that in the current time period we're in, where we're really starting to grow tired of this dogma that we've been under constantly as spiritual seekers, and that a lot of people tend to gravitate towards that, to drop everything. It's all bad. It's, we can't trust any of it. How can we do that? How can we take what is so important, because really stuff is passed down through tradition, and tradition's important, but how can we sift through that and take what's truly meaningful and understand what it is that we sort of need to abandon for our own self?
That's a good question, Baba. How do we sift through it?
Yeah, sorry, it's kind of a loaded question.
No, it's a great question. Well, first of all, my late father used to say, if a tradition needs to be defended, it's already dying, which is really profound.
Yeah.
And I think that before I went to seminary, I studied with the Celebrant Foundation and became a ritualist. And in ritual, and that ties into the study and development of liturgy, which is used in worship.
Right.
If there's rote memorization and saying things over and over again, it starts to lose its relevance, because we're not thinking about. We're just we're just saying the words and getting into a little bit of an alpha state. That's cool, but if a liturgy, first of all, I think it's important that whatever you decide to do, I'm going to come back to your core, but that you do it in language that's alive and relevant and in the moment.
Right.
And I like to every 6 weeks or so have people, when we get in our services to the Our Father, use one of the Aramaic translations, because otherwise you get into the sing-song thing. Our Father, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's like, no, it's Thy will be done.
Lost
Period.
all the meaning.
On earth as like it's there's Thy kingdom. No, here's how it goes. It's Thy kingdom come. Period. And then Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Period.
Right.
So I think that and there's things that have worked so long and are so wonderful that they become locked in.
Right.
And when you hear them over and over again, they don't have any meaning. I think that's the first thing. That's like the third thing. The first thing is to look at what in a tradition is toxic.
Right.
Right? What's toxic? Patriarchy is toxic.
Absolutely.
Right? Classism is toxic. This need for all this language about kings and lords, and that stuff can be very toxic. And of course, that's how it was framed. And if we look at the Setz in Leben, the German theologians would say, if we look at the context, we understand that, well, yeah, they had kings. They didn't have queens. They had powerful, wealthy people. And so this idea of trying to see this superlative, transcendent, ineffable, unknowable, divine entity, you're calling it a king, because you're never going to get close to that action, right? So that's where you go. But there's all that patriarchal stuff built in. So I think if we find in every person, if you're able to find what's toxic to you, that's what you let go. I don't need that. Ooh, but this core message of compassion, that's wonderful. I'm going to take that. And this, I think about loving my neighbor, I'm going to take that, Yeah, the Lord thing. When there used to be a lot of bumper stickers that said Jesus is Lord, I wanted to make one that said, and Bob is his vassal. And I wanted to put it on everybody's car, but I didn't do it. It was too snarky.
That really, this seems to be a problem that is both very, very apparent in both Eastern and Western tradition, where we build up this concept of God or Buddha, where that's outside of us, right? As soon as we start creating this figurehead who is so much superior, so it erases all possibility that he's emanating, or she is emanating through us.
Right.
And one of my favorite quotes ever, this was a translation done by Thich Nhat Hanh, but the quote originally comes from the Chan master Lin Ji.
Oh, okay.
And he says, if you happen to come across the Buddha, cut his head off. And that this is the guy who also really was one of the first people to start, beating monks with sticks and shouting at them. To that became really his name gets translated into Rinzai in Japanese Zen practice, and so the Rinzai school that's the school that really spread this practice of Zen and meditation throughout Japan.
Right.
And the whole point is we get locked into these words. The words lose their meaning, and so we need to do something fresh to awaken that experience. So one of his things to awaken that experience and to get rid of this concept of, oh, worship Buddha, all this stuff, is cut his head off.
Well, the Buddha made very clear, I don't want special robes. My friend Peter Savastano talks about this. He was ordained as a Tibetan Buddhist priest. And he talks about the fact that the Buddha didn't want any of this. And Peter had been raised a Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic. And he said, one day as a priest, I was, incense and robes and beads. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is too close to the same gig all over again.
Right.
I think that, and this is one of the things I brought from the Quaker community. When I joined the UCC, and I'm so grateful that I found this denomination, because they're my sacred activism, that life, and my desire to have no dogma and doctrine, but still follow the Christ and embody the Christ. This is the place.
Absolutely.
I lost my train of thought.
Peter Savastano.
Right. When I was being interviewed by this church where I've been for 2 years, they said, is there anything else we should know at the end of the interview? I said, yeah, I don't do robes and stoles. Because the Quakers teach you don't differentiate yourself. That's the whole thing about simple dress. You don't say, look, I'm special, I'm the pastor, and you're not. That's duality.
Absolutely.
I'm just a human, you're a human. And the church culture is such that when I got the job, when I first was working there, they were like, "Oh, we want to, we're going to be sharing our space with the Korean congregation. Can their pastor use your office?" And I was like, "It's your office,
right?
Not my office." Or they'd ask questions, and I'm like, "I'm not your daddy. I'm your servant.
Right.
You got to get this straight." It's a big difference,
Absolutely.
But people want the daddy. They want the authority figures.
It's what we're comfortable with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
They're comfortable with it, and society has told us, again, listen to the people who have the power and the authority. Really?
It's like spoon feeding. People just like having things in front of them. So it's kind of a path of least resistance. If that's what you're coveting, you're going to pursue these kind of institutions. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that partially to me gets to that love of tradition that can be very embedded in that mentality as well, because it's defending all of this orthodoxy and all of this dogma under the auspices that it's tradition. But I want your take on that, actually. I don't want to...
No, that's really good. You said it. I mean, the reality is that we default to what's comfortable, the path of the least resistance. We don't want to work any harder than we have to. That's the biological creature. Why should I do it the hard way?
Right.
Why do I have to, it's already there for me. And, maybe it's not, and I don't know it's not meaningful because I've never experienced meaningful. I've never had, someone who's had, I heard a discussion, something that George W. Bush was talking about when he became sober. He talked about, he had this visceral encounter with the Christ. He got knocked off his horse. And I think that I don't want to get political, but I don't think he's a bad human being. I think he may be misled or whatever. But he had
naive. I would say maybe a little naive.
I don't want to judge him, but he definitely had an experience that had made him in some ways very humble. You would never hear him say, well, my State Department or anything like that. He was never that kind of cat. And I'm a socialist, so I'm not a Republican. But, his humanity showed through.
Right.
And I think that's important to always look for the humanity in others. But you're right. We go with what's comfortable. And tradition, look, some traditions are healthy because we're embracing them and we're living them. But then when they start crumbling and we're saying, no, we need to keep it. It's always a sign that we need to do what? Why do we need to? Because it's easy?
Sorry.
I was going to say, with the whole system of, wanting a higher authority figure, it's interesting. It's interesting to notice, a lot of those systems that, that establish a higher authority figure in all types of forms, through religion, through politics, everything. It kind of relies on the people, the subjects of it, being tired in life or something that want, because that's what makes people want to just go by whatever the higher authority says.
Right.
So it's interesting, just I guess noticing what kind of societal things happen that lead people to get to that point of
Well, when there's a power structure and something goes wrong,
right.
The power structure says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put this in place, and it's like, oh, thank you.
They come to save the day.
Right now, my wife and I...
There's a sense of closure in that, I feel.
Yeah.
Well, my wife and I are getting ready to move, right? And she's real organized, and she's very spatial thinker and very organized, and I'm not either of those things. So I said to her, you just tell me what to do, and I'll do it. It's very comfortable. Lift those boxes, put them over there. I don't have to think about, So people, we prefer to have people make decisions for us many times.
It's easier.
as long as we like the decision,
Right.
you know.
What's up, bud?
Is that a fellow
That's a
crow?
hawk.
That's a crow.
It's a hawk.
Oh no, it was a crow. You're right. It was a
Yeah.
crow.
Yeah.
That's one of your.
Perfect.
It's one of
Yeah,
your
that's
corvids.
Now it's a crow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going in post.
Crows and hawks actually seem to
That's
be
post
the
now.
birds I encounter the most.
Hey, nice.
Hey.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah,
Brother.
He's a crow.
Yeah, I am corvid. Corvid and birds of prey and corvids are my spirit animals.
That's it right there.
Nice.
Yeah. So where were I have no idea where we were.
Yeah.
Authority figures.
Authority figures and
Well, this okay. Let me just say something about
Yeah,
that.
sure, sure.
Richard Rohr was one of my favorite teachers, the
Yeah.
Franciscan priest or Franciscan monk.
my mom loves him a lot as well.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
He is awesome. Some of his sayings, like "nobody else is your problem," I love.
Yeah.
But he talks about the universal Christ.
Right.
I remember teaching some middle school kids, Sunday school, and I was like, okay, let me talk about Jesus. What do you know about Jesus? One kid's like, well, his last name is Christ. I'm like, okay. It's not like the Christ of Philadelphia. This is
Right.
like the Christ means the anointed one. Christ means the anointed one. And Rohr talks about the fact that that the Christ is what's present in every molecule of reality. That's what the Christ is.
Right.
And we experience that when, well, Rohr doesn't say this is me now. We experience that reality when we let go and we let go of ego, that I'm human and you're a piece of grass. And,
Right.
we let go of that. And all of a sudden we're remembering that we're connected to all this. We're rooted in all this. Everything is the same. Everything is divine. Everything is worthy of reverence. When I was ordained at One Spirit, I was still a Quaker. And after the ordination, there was a reception, and everyone's going around going, hey, Rev, and I didn't do it. And one of the deans was like, what's the matter? I'm like, we don't use honorifics. Quakers don't use titles at all.
Right.
And he said, well, all it means is that you're one of the people who's raised his hand and said, yeah, I will treat everything I see as if it's worthy of reverence. I'm like, okay, that I can do. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Interesting.
This sort of falls in line with something we were talking about earlier that I wanted to mention. I'm glad it's reminded me of it. In that sense of understanding as that essence of Christ, the Christ molecule being the basis for our
Christ
existence, our
molecule.
consciousness. Like when we were talking before, like really the difference in the elements is only the amount of neutrons and protons and electrons they have. The base element of an atom or a subatomic particle is all the same.
Yeah.
And what I think is super interesting is that humans are all a balance of so many different elements. We're all a balance
Yeah.
of the same elements, and that these elements are orbiting at different frequencies, and that this sort of there was actually I forget the sage's name exactly, but there was a Hindu sage, a Brahmin, who actually was the first person to develop the theory of subatomic particles.
Wow.
He observed the chakras
Yeah.
and the solar system and saw how things orbit each other,
Yeah.
and then he applied that on the most micro scale and didn't map out exactly everything, but laid a foundation of, okay, there's this small particle and there's these things orbiting this small particle that balance it.
Yeah.
And that's done without
Wow.
any technology.
That's a trip.
It's just a complete introspective. And so really that it takes a sage, or it doesn't take a sage, but it, back then it took a sage to explain this level of science. But that also demonstrates what you were talking about, that this base level particles, this is what connects us. We all are just these vibrating particles of matter.
And then what happens psychologically once you become cognizant of that? Because that's kind of like to me the interplay between the psychological and the scientific aspect that you seem to like have a respect and understanding for.
I don't know anything about science.
Okay,
No, I don't. Nothing. I was, my brother's a microbiologist, and
Yeah.
he's older than me. And when I was going through school, and I got a right answer in science, they'd say, "Did your brother tell you?" I mean, I was dreadful in science, but I respect science. Yeah.
Yeah.
sure.
So, but your question. Go back to your question about the psychological.
Right. So, like, sometimes I wonder that what do you say to somebody who maybe struggles with this idea of oneness as you've described it, because maybe they're not capable of it, or they're afraid of it? Because I think I think in this context we love to talk about how important it is to, as you called it, to lose your ego, right? To reach that level,
Transcend it.
to
get
transcend
yeah,
it. But
yeah, yeah.
that's a I think that's a very difficult process for almost everyone.
It's just work. It's not. It's difficult. It's
Right.
not very. I don't think it's. I think it's very difficult if you fight with it.
Fight
But-
with it. How
But
so?
well, in other words, if you say, "Well, I want what I want. I don't want to go make a
Right.
casserole for so and so. I really want to watch, this rerun of Brooklyn Nine-Nine or whatever." Like it's like when we let go of our stuff so that we can. I'll take care of me later. This person needs me now.
There's a saying that Aleister Crowley had. I know he's a very controversial figure.
Well,
but,
I'm a huge Keith Richards fan, and
Oh,
he was
okay.
really into the Stones were really into him
c-
for a while.
ceremonial magic
Yeah,
and
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
like that. But
Yeah.
one of my favorite quotes of Aleister Crowley is, and I believe this is him. I know this is someone from the magic tradition, but that every step you take towards divinity takes 10 steps towards you.
Oh,
And
that's-
I think that's sort of the vein of what you're saying. is
That's
that
also very Jewish. Yeah, yeah.
Once
it's definitely true.
a lot of what he studied, Aleister Crowley, comes from the Kabbalah. I
Yeah,
believe,
exactly
so I'm not
right.
surprised.
Exactly
But
right.
this to me seems in vain what you were saying. Like, yeah, it is work, but once you actually put in the work, which is really just opening yourself up, it starts to become
Open
a
up and
little
let
bit
go.
easier.
Well, opening up and letting go are two very counterintuitive things for
Right.
humans.
Yeah.
Did you ever let go of a psychological burden and think you could never let it go? When you let go, like, oh my God, I feel so good. What was I waiting for?
Right. Yeah.
But I want to get back to Joe's question because I didn't answer it. What was your?
Sorry.
What exactly you? Do you remember what you were getting to?
Yeah, basically, was talking about. Well,
If someone resists unitive thought or
yes, either for reasons that we've discussed. Some being maybe they come from a more fundamentalist ideology that contradicts that, or they might have kind of what I like to think of as sort of they've peered into the rabbit hole and they're kind of afraid of the proverbial, I guess it's red pill. They're afraid of going into Wonderland. Like, what do you say to people like that?
Well, first of all, it's very hard for me because I want to fix everybody's shit, right? I always do. I want to make everybody. And the reality is, as Richard Rohr says, nobody else is my problem. So if that's what their perception is, I don't say anything to them unless they come to me and say, explain to me why ba ba ba, right?
Right.
For me to preach at them is kind of, it's almost a form of violence. Like if I say to them, you're on the wrong path, bro. Look at you're thinking this and a duality just made. I mean, you could, if I wait for someone to ask me, like you just asked me,
Sure.
and then I'll lay. I mean, we all love to give our opinions. That's also human
Right.
nature. But if everybody's on their own. This is what the Quaker world taught me. Everyone is on their own, at their own place of understanding, enlightenment, and awakening. They're where they are. And they're doing their work, they're on their journey, none of my business. Unless they start messing with me or I see them hurting somebody.
Right.
You just pray, you pray, may they find their way. I think that because dualistic thinking makes anxiety. It makes us anxious. So if they can get to a unitive place, they'll be less anxious. So you pray that they get there. May they find that space.
Right.
It's tempting to want to straighten people out. I mean, believe me.
Especially when they're close to you, right?
Yeah, the closer yes, exactly right. You want to fix the people you love.
There- No, sorry. You didn't mean to-
No. Does that? I mean,
It
I'm not
does,
saying
yeah,
to you
yeah.
don't do it, but I'm saying
Yeah.
the temptation. It's good to just observe them and just if you can make your job is to transcend your ego and be present and be empathetic and compassionate, and that's all. Their job, you can't make them do things. I worked with a contractor once, and he used to grab my hands and make me do that. He'd say, "No, you're doing it wrong." I'm like, I didn't learn anything because I'm just part of his arms. You can't really force people to understand stuff. They will be taught. This is karma. They will be taught the lessons they need to be taught when it's time, whether they're ready or not.
I have a question, which is, why do you think it is that when we have this divisiveness, that it causes neurosis? I mean, it's I'm really fond of this concept called dependent co-arising, which is that no phenomena that you encounter is separate from yourself, right? So like any argument, anything that you have, we always go to, oh, it's their fault, right? But the point of that is to, it's like, no, dude, you're part of it too. So part of it's your fault, right? But it seems like, you know, what causes this combativeness in our brain is like you were saying, this inability to accept that it is all one. What else? What can we do to sort of overcome that without necessarily meditating or doing anything else?
Well, there's also this need to be right, and this need to be important, and this need to be seen.
Right. All coming from the ego.
All ego, right? And I mean, and some of that is egoic, some of that is healthy. We do need to be heard.
Right.
We do need to be seen.
For survival.
We don't need to be right.
Yeah. Right.
We don't have to have things our way. And that's really hard because, again, all of society, Wall Street, Madison Avenue, Hollywood, they're telling us all the time, be yourself, be your own person, take care of you. You know, you get to be right. You can be president, all that stuff. You know, and it's interesting when a friend of mine went to someone who does past life work.
Very cool.
You know, like, oh, you were a warrior. Oh, you were a prince. No one is ever like, oh, you were a swineherd.
Right.
You took care of pigs, you know, in the back of the village. No one's ever that person.
Or like a dictator.
Yeah. Or you were a horrible human being. You murdered
like a
people.
despot.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. That's good. That's good. Yeah. Well, I think the divisiveness comes from the reptilian brain saying, "I am this, that is that." Whether it's another person or my environment or a thing, that helps me, at some level, at a very primitive level, function.
Right.
Right. But I don't really, I just think all it does is get us in trouble, is thinking that things are different or that, I mean, it's interesting that the word for judgment in the Bible, in the Greek, which is what our Bible is translated from the Greek, which is an interesting history, but the Septuagint, which was, there was an Egyptian pharaoh who wanted to add the Hebrew scriptures to the big library in Alexandria. So he had 70 some odd rabbis come together and compile it and put it into Greek. And that was used from those days on by Jewish teachers, by Hebrew teachers, the rabbis, which are different than rabbis. They were pre-rabbinic era. But anyway, so the Septuagint, called so because of SEPT, meaning 70 rabbis. Sure. You know, that is the authoritative Tanakh Jewish scripture, right? Which means the Torah, and then the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, and the different writings in the Old Testament. Jews do not call it the Old Testament. It's a little bit of a derogatory term.
Right.
The word that's used for judgment has two meanings. It means to render judgment. It also means to practice discernment, right? So I can say, you know, Manny he's doing stuff I shouldn't be doing, and if I hang out with him, I'm going to do unhealthy stuff. It doesn't mean anything.
That might even be true. It's probably actually true.
It probably is true. But so in other words, I don't get to judge him and say, oh, he's weak, and I get to practice discernment. I really shouldn't hang out with him.
Right.
Right. That's about you.
It's about us. It's about us. It's in other
It's
words,
about Manny too,
it's
as we've established.
right.
It's that healthy egoism you were talking about.
Right.
We do need to be able to, on a certain level, label things and say, oh, this is different because that's how we figured out what's poisonous,
Right.
what kind of animal is going to kill us. These are all survival tools. So we do have survival tools that we need for our own psychology and spirituality. So that is the like you were saying, nothing's ever absolute, right?
Right.
We don't need to absolutely render away discernment and division.
No.
But
Well, it's discernment. It doesn't have to
Right.
be division.
Right.
It's discernment.
Absolutely.
In other words, just because I don't do what he does or hang with him when he's doing it doesn't mean if he's in trouble I won't help him or I don't
Right.
love him as another human being. Right.
Yeah.
It's not like a light switch of like
Right. That's
accepting
well.
a person or not. Or
That's
like,
well.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
well put. I mean, somebody can really be toxic to me, and I can say, yeah, that's toxic for me to do that, you know,
Right.
and to be with them. But it doesn't mean I'm judging them. It's what
Absolutely.
they're doing, you know.
I watch my actions though.
And interestingly, there's a common saying in Christian church that I hate. It's like, hate the sin, love the sinner. It's like, just don't like that. Don't like that.
Mm.
Because there's a lot of judgment packed into that, unhealthy judgment. But in essence, it's a perversion or a corruption of the concept of discernment. In other words, you're doing something that's not cool. It doesn't mean you're not good loved by God. It just
Right.
means I can't deal with you and your stuff.
Right, and I think that's probably one of the most mature things as spiritual seekers that we come to a realization that when we're overwhelmed with this love and compassion, that we have to learn to boundaries and turn that towards ourselves as well. I think this is a great stopping point. This has been an amazing conversation, Jack. Just tell us where can we find you? Where can we find the practice of the 5 doors?
The 5 doors, the5doors.com.
Great. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, this was so much fun. We'll definitely do this another time soon.
I feel like we just scratched the surface.
No, yeah, but please, we'll stay in contact and we'll
Yeah,
do
yeah.
another episode soon. This was
Certainly
great.
welcome back.
Yeah,
Thank you. All
absolutely.
blessings
Always.
to you
Yeah.
guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.